One aspect of film developing that a lot of people have questions about is agitation. And unlike most other technical issues of film developing, agitation is kind of a subjective thing. It's something that everybody is going to do a little bit differently. If you look up the film developing times for any particular film and developer combination, you'll see listed, develop at this temperature, at this time, and you'll get the good results. And that stuff is easily repeatable. It's something that everybody can do the same. Everybody's, time is the same, for everybody. Temperatures, if you've got an accurate thermometer, it's going to be the same. Agitation's a big variable because each of us does it a little bit differently. And the descriptions and the instructions are in the books on how to do this can describe how it's done, but it's hard to understand exactly how hard you should agitate, how fast, how long, until you actually see somebody doing it, which is what I'm going to demonstrate for you now. I'm using here a 4-reel stainless steel tank, and this is what I usually use for most of my work. But what I'm going to demonstrate to you here will work with any developing tank. You can do this with the 2-reel stainless steel tanks or with the plastic tanks. They all pretty much work the same as far as that. With most developers, what I do is after I pour the chemicals into the tank, you agitate for the first 30 seconds. And the first thing that I do after I pour the chemicals into the tank is hit the tank on the palm of my hand like this. And the purpose of doing that is to dislodge air bubbles. Because if there's any air bubbles attached to the film or on the reels, they can cause problems for you. Because if there's an air bubble stuck on the emulsion side of the film, the developer can't act where that air bubble is there stuck on the film. So you get spots on your film. And hitting the tank on the palm of your hand like that dislodges air bubbles. It knocks them free so that they float up to the top of the tank away from the film. And so we start out, hit it on your hand, and then you invert the tank like this, and after each inversion, I hit it on my hand again to dislodge. Air bubbles after each inversion. And the actual speed that I do it, because I did this a little slower so you could see the actual action. This would be the actual speed that I do it at, and the actual vigor used. Just like that, and I do that continuously for the first 30 seconds. At the end of the 30 seconds, hit it a couple more times just to dislodge the air bubbles that might be in there, set it on the counter, and don't touch it anymore. Leave it there until it's time to agitate again. You don't want to play around with it or roll it around or mess around with it, because that is moving the chemicals around in there too when you do that, and that can introduce more agitation. So you leave it sit, watch your timer. After 30 seconds have elapsed, time to agitate again. Now every 30 seconds I do the same thing that I just showed you, except that I only invert the tank 2 times. I pick it up, just like that. Pick it up, invert it, hit it, invert it, hit it, set it down. And just do that every 30 seconds until the end of the developing time. If the end of the developing time comes at the end of one of those 30-second periods where you would normally agitate, you don't need to agitate again because you're pouring the developer out anyway. Just pop the top off, pour it out, and you're done. It's important to get the agitation right, because if you agitate too hard or too long, you can get, basically it increases grain. You get a lot more grain, you get reduced sharpness, and you get increased contrast. On the other hand, if you don't agitate enough, if you agitate too gently, like that, or you don't agitate long enough, you can get uneven developing. You can get streaks, or you can get spots from air bubbles, or you can get, I've seen in cases where I've tried to reduce the agitation a lot, I've gotten situations with 35mm film where the edges are developed more than the center because the agitation wasn't enough to move the chemicals near the center of the frames away. And so it's important to agitate enough to eliminate those uneven developing problems, but you don't want to do it too harshly because then you'll get a lot more grain. And the speed and vigor that I've showed you here, some people think that's a little too harsh, but it works well for me. It doesn't make the grain too bad. I have never had any trouble with uneven developing. It works well. I know there's a lot of people online who like to do reduced agitation schemes, like stand developing, for example, which is a way of developing where you use a very highly dilute developer, and you agitate it at the beginning and then basically let it sit for 15 or 20 minutes with no more agitation. And that does produce a lot less grain. However, every time I've ever tried it, I've gotten very unevenly developed negatives. There's a lot of people who swear by it, though, so if it's something you'd like to try, it might be something that would be interesting for you to see if you can make it work, because I know some people can. I'm just not one of them. But for beginners, I recommend sticking with the standard agitation pattern I just showed you here. The first 30 seconds and then 2 inversions every 30 seconds after that. And do it just at that speed and vigor that I've just shown you, and you should get good negatives then. Agitation is important because it moves the developer that's in contact with the film. It gets exhausted pretty quickly because of the chemical reactions between the developer and the silver in the film. And so by agitating, you're moving those exhausted chemicals away from the surface of the film so that new, fresh developer that's floating around in the tank can get there and touch the film and do its work. And as I said, this is something a lot of people have trouble understanding, a lot of beginners, especially if you're learning stuff online, because you'll read descriptions of how to do this stuff, but it's really hard to envision exactly how it should look until you see a video of it. So I'm hoping that this will be a good tutorial for those of you who are just getting started with photography. I've been doing this for 25 years now, ever since I was 15 years old, and this is the way I was taught to do it by my high school art teacher, and it's worked well for me ever since then. So hopefully it'll work well for you.